Sometimes it's not the shouting that gives her away, it's the silence between her sentences, the little phrases, the casual remarks, the subtle digs wrapped in confidence and coated with charm. Foolishness doesn't always come with drama. Sometimes it hides behind what sounds like empowerment, self-awareness, or honesty. But for the trained ear, for the Stoic mind, these words ring hollow. Because what sounds like strength is often ego, what sounds like insight is often deflection. And what sounds like just being real is often emotional immaturity in disguise. The Stoics said, "Speech is the mirror of the soul." And when a woman keeps repeating the same toxic phrases, she isn't just speaking. She's revealing everything about how she sees herself, you, and the world around her. In this video, we expose 6 things stupid women say, not to mock, not to insult, but to sharpen your discernment. Because the moment you recognize these phrases for what they are, you stop reacting and start reclaiming your clarity. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment. I see through it now. Let's begin. Because once you hear these words, you won't unhear them. And that's the first step toward freedom. 1. I'm just being honest. One of the most deceptively damaging phrases you'll ever hear from a woman is, "I'm just being honest." At first it sounds noble, truthful, straightforward, but look closely. This phrase is rarely used in the spirit of truth. It's not meant to build clarity. It's designed to cut, to inflict, to walk the line between cruelty and credibility without ever being held accountable. It usually follows a remark that hits below the belt, maybe a swipe at your intelligence, your career progress, or something deeply personal like your role as a father. And when you raise an eyebrow or step back to reflect, she won't apologize. She'll simply blame your reaction. Don't be so sensitive. In that moment, you're not dealing with a truth teller. You're dealing with someone weaponizing directness as a shield for their emotional immaturity. A woman who lives by that phrase doesn't value truth. She values control. She wants to see how far she can push before you flinch. I once knew a man, retired Navy, whose wife had a habit of saying it like it is. Over the years, her honesty chipped away at his confidence. At first, it was about his parenting, how he wasn't stern enough. Then, it was about his body, how he'd let himself go since leaving active duty. Later, it turned into jabs about his ambition, how other men his age were still building while he was content with his pension. Whenever he tried to express discomfort, she'd call him soft, laugh, or accuse him of twisting her words. He stayed silent for years, believing that enduring her honesty was the price of love. But that's not love. That's erosion. The Stoics warned us that cruelty often disguises itself as virtue. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Kindness is invincible provided it is sincere." And that's the key. Sincerity, not domination, not manipulation. A Stoic man doesn't shy away from truth, but he knows truth isn't a dagger, it's a mirror. And if someone only uses it to stab, they aren't seeking clarity, they're seeking power. A woman who constantly drops verbal grenades and hides behind the excuse of being real is not being authentic. She's testing your limits. She's watching to see if your boundaries are firm, or if your silence can be bought with discomfort. This is where Stoicism becomes not just a philosophy, but armor. Epictetus reminds us, it's not what happens to you, but how you react that matters. The wise man doesn't argue back, doesn't perform anger. He recognizes what's happening and removes the audience. Because when someone shows you that their version of honesty is cruelty wrapped in confidence, there's only one lesson left to learn. You don't owe your presence to someone who confuses destruction with depth. Now we move forward to another phrase just as corrosive but more seductive. It's the kind of sentence that sounds like self-awareness, but is really a warning. One that says, "I'm not changing, you'll just have to survive me." 2. If you can't handle me at my worst. According to psychological studies on relationship dynamics, one of the strongest predictors of long-term emotional distress in men is prolonged exposure to unpredictable emotional outbursts. Not violence, not infidelity, but chronic instability disguised as authenticity, and no phrase signals that more clearly than the modern favorite, "If you can't handle me at my worst, you don't deserve me at my best." What sounds empowering is, in reality, a cleverly romanticized excuse for erratic behavior. It tells you, without shame, that she's not interested in accountability, only indulgence. It's not a plea for understanding. It's a demand for unconditional tolerance, without reciprocal effort. This phrase is often tossed out after an emotional blow-up, a pattern of disrespect, or a trail of bad decisions that she refuses to own. It's a deflection tactic, one that reframes her volatility as a test of your loyalty. But here's the reality. A woman who brandishes her worst self like a warning label is not preparing you for trust. She's warning you that chaos is her currency. And if you accept it once, you'll be paying for it forever. A Stoic man, however, does not audition for tolerance. He doesn't prove his worth by enduring storms that never end. He doesn't stay to show how much he can take. He stays when there is peace to build, not chaos to survive. The man who has walked through his own inner fire, who has faced trauma, aging, failure, and grief, doesn't view drama as passion. He views it as erosion. And the moment a woman presents her worst, like it's a permanent fixture instead of a season she's trying to grow from, he sees it for what it is, a red flag waving proudly in broad daylight. Stoicism teaches us that strength is not found in how much pain you can tolerate from others. It's found in the discernment to choose peace even when chaos is packaged as love. Marcus Aurelius said, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." And a man who spends his days anticipating the next emotional explosion isn't thinking with clarity, he's surviving on emotional eggshells. That's not nobility, that's slow decay. When she says, "If you can't handle me at my worst," understand this. What she's really saying is, "I will not change, and you will have to." And once you buy into that contract, your own identity begins to shrink. Your boundaries bend. Your silence becomes submission. And slowly, your presence in the relationship becomes less about mutual growth and more about containment. The Stoic man does not submit to fire just to prove he's strong. He walks where the air is clear. And when a woman confuses unpredictability with depth, he doesn't argue. He exits, without noise, without insult, without apology. Next, we move to a more venomous phrase, one that strikes directly at your masculinity, not to challenge it, but to control it. 3. You're not man enough. One of the most subtle forms of manipulation doesn't sound angry, it sounds daring. It's when a woman looks you in the eye after dismissing your values, minimizing your voice, and then says something calculated like, "You're not man enough." That's not a conversation. It's a provocation. It's not meant to open a dialogue. It's designed to strike a nerve. She's not trying to understand you. She's trying to see how fast you'll perform. It's a trap to lure you into reaction, to hijack your composure and make your strength about how loudly you can respond rather than how quietly you can stay grounded. The tragedy is that many men fall for it, not because they're weak, but because they've been taught that masculinity must be defended on demand. But that's not strength. That's slavery to her approval. A Stoic man sees this dynamic for what it is, a game of bait and control. When someone uses your identity as leverage, it means they never respected it in the first place. The moment you start performing your worth instead of living it, you've already handed it over. True strength isn't loud. It doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to take the bait just to prove it can bite. Strength is being unmoved in the face of insult, Not because you didn't hear it, but because you know what defines you doesn't come from outside voices. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Choose not to be harmed, and you won't be." That's not about denial, it's about ownership. When someone throws a line like, "You're not man enough," what they're really saying is, "I want to see you break." But the Stoic man doesn't dance to prove he has legs. He walks, quietly, deliberately. And if someone keeps trying to poke holes in his armor, he doesn't reinforce it with bravado. He removes the audience. Because when a woman repeatedly tests your identity through insult, she's not testing for strength, she's testing for submission. She wants control over your reaction so she can rewrite the narrative that your fire is weakness, that your anger is proof, that your silence is guilt. But silence, for the Stoic, is not weakness, it's strategy. The man who chooses not to engage in every provocation is not avoiding the fight. He's choosing a higher battlefield, one where dignity wins over drama, where control isn't about volume, but presence. The woman who needs you to explode to feel powerful isn't challenging your masculinity. She's confessing her inability to handle a man who doesn't flinch. The next phrase may not insult your manhood outright, but it carries just as much poison. It's the kind of sentence that hides behind pride, independence, and defiance. And if you mistake it for confidence, you'll find yourself giving to someone who's already convinced she needs nothing from you. 4. I don't need a man. When a woman loudly proclaims, "I don't need a man," it rarely comes from a place of quiet power. More often, it comes from accumulated resentment, spoken after years of unresolved tension, failed connections, and unacknowledged wounds. This isn't the voice of independence, it's the echo of defense. The volume isn't confidence, it's the sound of someone trying to convince herself that isolation is a victory. A truly grounded woman doesn't need to broadcast her independence. She embodies it with grace, with calm, with stillness. But the woman who uses this phrase like a badge is often signaling something deeper, not a rejection of men, but a frustration with her inability to coexist with one without friction. And the more she repeats this line, the more she unconsciously prepares herself for another war, not a partnership. The mistake many men make is believing that this attitude is strength. They hear it and think, "She's powerful." But soon they find their support turned into the next thing she pushes away. Not because she doesn't want help, but because accepting it would force her to soften. And softening for her feels like vulnerability, a language she no longer speaks. A Stoic man doesn't argue with declarations like this. He doesn't try to fix it. He doesn't plead to be the exception. He simply listens, evaluates, and steps back with dignity. Because when someone defines themselves by absence, by what they claim not to need, they've already decided to hold power through distance. And the worst thing you can do is hand over your emotional investment to someone who's built their identity around keeping it out. The Stoic path isn't about changing others. It's about refusing to be changed by those who resist connection but demand presence. Marcus Aurelius said, "Withdraw into yourself. The rational soul is its own shelter. And when you're faced with someone who claims they don't need you, believe them without anger, without argument, and without apology. Because sometimes the most self-loving act isn't staying to prove you're valuable. It's walking away without needing to be valued at all. What comes next is even more dangerous. Not loud, not defiant, but deceptively gentle. It's a phrase that wears the mask of trauma and victimhood, but behind it is a story that never includes growth. And if you're not careful, you'll find yourself fighting ghosts you didn't create, all while being cast as the villain. 5. All my exes were toxic. When a woman tells you that every man in her past was toxic, pause, because what she's offering isn't just a glimpse into her history. It's a confession about how she tells stories, not one X, not two, all of them. And while trauma is real, this kind of sweeping declaration doesn't point to healing. It points to a pattern. The Stoic man hears what's missing, no reflection, no responsibility, no nuance. Just one continuous loop where she's always the victim and everyone else is cast as a villain. It's not her pain that's alarming, it's her relationship with it. Because someone who has truly grown through suffering doesn't keep using it as their introduction. I knew a man, mid-50s, twice divorced, who met a woman that seemed deeply self-aware. She was charming, intelligent, and spoke about her past with raw emotion. But over time it became clear, every story ended the same way. He lied. He ruined me. He was a narcissist. After months of listening, he finally asked her, "What part did you play in any of this?" She went silent, offended by the question, as if accountability was betrayal. He stayed longer than he should have, believing his patience would inspire change. Instead, his patience was seen as permission, and her story just swallowed him too. Seneca warned, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." And some people don't just suffer from that illusion, they build their identity around it. They turn pain into performance. And when you're the next man in the story, don't think you'll be treated differently. You're not being chosen, you're being assigned a role. She'll script it, edit it, and eventually rewrite it. And when conflict comes, as it always does, it won't be met with communication or introspection. It'll be met with a pre-written narrative, just like the rest of them. A Stoic man knows that a person's relationship with their past reveals everything about how they'll treat their present. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." But a woman who still blames every man in her rearview mirror is not advancing. She's circling. And if you attach yourself to that orbit, you'll find yourself paying debts you didn't create. You don't need her to be perfect, but you do need her to be honest. And real honesty doesn't sanitize the past. It owns it. The woman who always casts herself as the hero or the victim isn't ready for partnership. She's still trapped in theater. And you? You were meant for something quieter, something steady, something that doesn't need rehearsed grief to feel meaningful. What's next is subtle but even more dangerous, a phrase that sounds like strength but is almost always used when integrity is no longer present. It's not about connection, it's about control. And it's time we talk about the most misused word in the female vocabulary, worth. 6. I know my worth. Studies in behavioral psychology have shown that individuals who frequently talk about their self-worth are often compensating for deep-seated insecurity, not demonstrating actual confidence. In other words, the louder the proclamation, the emptier the core. So when a woman looks at you and says, "I know my worth," don't assume you're hearing the voice of a stable, self-possessed woman. In many cases, what you're really hearing is a practiced line, one that's been rehearsed, repeated, and often weaponized. This isn't about genuine value, it's about performance. It's a phrase that typically emerges when she's being challenged, about her behavior, her expectations, her inconsistencies. Rather than reflect or reassess, she declares her worth, loudly, sharply, with conviction but without substance. True worth is never announced. It's lived. It's consistent. It doesn't need defending because it's recognized through grace, patience, character, and boundaries. The woman who truly knows her value doesn't need to tell you. She shows you, quietly, through how she carries herself when no one's watching. But the one who uses "I know my worth" as a verbal shield is rarely talking about worth at all. What she's really referencing is her price, the standard she uses to justify entitlement, overreaction, and walking away from accountability whenever it feels uncomfortable. It's not about value, it's about leverage. A Stoic man recognizes this immediately. He knows the difference between value and volume, and he refuses to enter debates about someone's self-declared greatness. He doesn't validate false power with attention. He simply listens, observes, and steps away when what's presented as strength is actually resistance to growth. Marcus Aurelius said, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." The same applies here. When someone has to constantly affirm their worth with words, they are, by nature, uncertain of it themselves. The danger isn't in the phrase, it's in the emotional transaction it creates. You start feeling like you have to prove something. You start justifying your standards, explaining your boundaries, defending your expectations. And before you realize it, you're negotiating with someone who's never been open to alignment in the first place, because her version of worth isn't about shared vision, it's about control. And when that control is threatened, she doesn't reflect. She doubles down. The Stoic path is clear. You don't debate inflated egos. You don't try to fix what doesn't want to evolve. You simply stay rooted in your own clarity. You don't need to insult her, correct her, or win her over. You just don't engage. And that silence, that stillness, it's not avoidance. It's the highest form of self-respect. What comes next isn't a phrase. It's your response. Because after you've heard all 6 of these lines, the question isn't, what's wrong with her? The real question is, what will you now do with what you've seen? You don't win by shouting louder. You win by walking away with your peace still intact. Because when a woman reveals herself through the phrases we've just exposed, you don't need to correct her. You only need to believe her. Every word she repeats, every phrase she clings to, tells you exactly how she sees herself and what she expects from you. Tolerance without accountability, patience without balance, and respect she hasn't earned. But a Stoic man doesn't argue with illusions. He doesn't try to rescue someone from a mindset they worship. He simply hears what's real and exits what's not. Marcus Aurelius said, "The best revenge is to be unlike the one who caused you harm, and that's your quiet power. Not to fight her games, but to rise above them. No lectures, no drama, just presence, then distance." If this video gave you the clarity you needed, don't keep it to yourself. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment. I won't argue with foolishness. I outgrow it. Because wisdom doesn't beg to be heard. It simply becomes undeniable and leaves everything petty behind in silence.